bring to the podium our chair of the Judiciary, Charles Allen, who also is a CJCC member and who chairs our Combating Violent Crime group. And this group has really been looking at ways to not only strategically, but in an action-oriented way, address and inform the work that we're doing on to address violent crime in the District of Columbia. Without further ado, Councilman Allen.
Thank you, Manon, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. And it is my pleasure to help introduce our speakers. And before I begin, I'll try to at least lay a little framework. There's probably a lot of people here who kind of have an idea of and understand the subject matter and what is risk terrain modeling exactly. But I want to talk about a little bit why this is so important. Efforts to improve our public safety and focusing on our neighborhoods historically focuses on trying to identify and then deploy resources kind of into those hotspots and focus that. And while focusing on hotspots puts resources where the crime is, it doesn't always try to get at what are some of the underlying causes that are leading to why a certain neighborhood or a certain space is experiencing a lot of crime. So the premise behind risk terrain modeling is that certain places are going to have particular features. It could be a number of things. It could be parks, bars, blighted properties, liquor stores, that when combined in a particular grouping, end up creating an environment in which crime becomes more likely to occur. I sometimes think with the transportation hat on. And in that we talk about the built environment, for example. So if we have a really dangerous intersection, we also try to look at what's helping cause that. And it could be the way that it's oriented, or where cars are parked, or if there's a pedestrian bulb out. There's a lot of environmental factors that actually go into what it is that we're seeing and experiencing. And that's kind of what risk terrain modeling gets at. And then once a jurisdiction understands what the groupings when those groupings make crime more likely, then we can start to help plan around that from a resource perspective and from a planning perspective, try to help create more leverage to help mitigate the risk and obviously improve public safety and create safer environments and safer communities. So I'm looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have this afternoon, and I think that it does have kind of the capacity for us to help think through in maybe some new ways, how do we get at creating safer neighborhoods across the city. So now I'm going to introduce our two guest speakers. Very much enjoy that we have Dr. Leslie W. Kennedy, Dr. Joel Caplan, who traveled this morning down from Rutgers, and hopefully they have a safe journey back this afternoon on the Turnpike. But Dr. Leslie Kennedy currently serves as the University Professor at Rutgers University School of Criminal Justice. Dr. Kennedy's recent research has focused on risk assessment, concentrating on crime mapping and the development of the risk terrain model methodology. In addition to his work developing this, Dr. Kennedy and Dr. Caplan have been involved in two major federally funded research projects, implementing and evaluating risk terrain modeling practices in 7 different cities in the United States. Prior to his current position, Dr. Kennedy served as the Dean of the Rutgers University School of Criminal Justice from 1998 to 2007. And during his time in academia, he has authored and co-authored 20 books and over 70 research articles published in major journals in criminology and criminal justice. And Dr. Joel Caplan joined the faculty of Rutgers University as an assistant professor in 2008. He also serves as the deputy director of the Rutgers Center on Public Security, where he co-developed and continues to advance risk terrain modeling methods for spatial risk analysis. His current research activities focus on policing, crime control, and evidence-based resource allocation. And prior to his time in academia, Dr. Caplan held a variety of public safety positions, including police officer, a 911 dispatcher, as well as an emergency medical technician. So with that said, please help join me in welcoming our two speakers today. I'm going to turn it over to them.
So I'm going to do a quick introduction just to thank you for inviting us, and then we're going to go to the presentation. It's great that there's this many people who come out for the talk. I want to specifically thank Ellen McCann, who is a graduate of Rutgers University. So she's been obviously talking us up, which is good. She led to the invitation, which is also good. I don't know where you got that overview, but you can. You can come with us everywhere we go. You explain what we're doing better than probably we do, right? Anyway, hopefully you'll be able to benefit from some of our ideas. The important focus here is really thinking about how do you use the data that you currently have in a more creative and contextual way, and to try and think about it, using it as evidence-based for problem solving. I think what we've got locked into is we've got a lot of data, and we use it in a flat way, we use it in a descriptive way, but we don't use it in an analytical way. And I think it's very important that as we communicate with the agencies and the practitioners, that they start thinking that way as well. They know they have to solve problems, but often we don't give them the tools or the information or the evidence that helps them do that. So that's really what inspires this, that's really inspired our approach. The other thing that inspired it, I think, is the notion that it actually makes sense. I mean, when you think about it, if you're talking about changing outcomes, you should be thinking about the environment in which those outcomes are taking place. And there are things that we can do to change those environments. And I think, so first of all, you have to know what the environments are and how the impact on those outcomes and behavior, if it's crime or public health or whatever it is you're looking at. And then you can engage people who are using those environments and get them to think of different ways that they can mitigate the problems or mitigate the risks in those environments through changing them. So that's the gist of what we're focusing on. Now I'm going to turn it over to Joel, who is going to give you a detailed explanation of our approach, and then we'll open it to questions. You obviously can stop us anytime you like and ask questions, because we want to get this engaged you with not only giving you information, but engaging you in a conversation about our work. So thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. First, obviously, this is intended to give you some detailed information and to introduce and inform regarding risk train modeling, but it's also intended to spur conversation. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions that you have during the presentation, and we also should have time for after as well. I'll just get right to it by explaining what risk train modeling is. And the way that we usually begin this conversation is by asking you to imagine something unrelated to crime, and that is playful behavior. So I'd like you to consider a place where children repeatedly play. And if we focus only on these kids, we'd miss the presence of swings and slides and open fields. That is, features of this place that define a playground as opposed to other locations that would attract children because of these entertaining qualities. It's these features of the landscape that are really influencing and enabling their playful behavior. And with that in mind, we developed risk train modeling at Rutgers University probably about 8 years ago now, as a way to identify the risks that come from features of a landscape and then model how they co-locate and overlap to create these unique behavior settings for crime. We've conducted research since the development of risk train modeling in multiple cities throughout the United States as well as elsewhere throughout the world. But the ones that occurred in the US were funded by various federal agencies. And we found through this research, which was intended to do two things. One, to test whether risk train modeling worked with regard to diagnosing the underlying features of crime, as well as providing forecasts as a result of that of where crime is likely to emerge, and whether or not this information can be used by police and other practitioners to have a meaningful impact, to have actionable information for doing something about these crime problems. Not just problem orientation, but problem solution. And what we found was that we achieved significant reductions in both violent and property crimes by as much as 42% in one location in just 3 months. And these results were significant and were done in a way that allowed us to compare these target areas to control areas. So we utilized an experimental design. And we can discuss some of these case studies and some of the strategies that the police used in developing these strategies later on. We did bring some of that information to go into detail about it. But what I want to highlight from this is that, environmental contexts for crime vary across different jurisdictions and for different types of crime. The context for bike theft can be different from motor vehicle theft, and can be different for burglary and shootings and robbery and so forth. And the way we think about this is through the analogy of a kaleidoscope. That is, the cylinder of the kaleidoscope represents the particular environment or the study setting that we're interested in examining. So in this case, the District of Columbia, or the city of Newark, or Atlantic City, New Jersey, as we'll demonstrate in just a moment. The shards of glass within this kaleidoscope or within this cylinder represent crime attractors, or features of that environment like bars, fast food restaurants, grocery stores, parks, and so forth. And as we move from environment to environment, it represents a turn of this kaleidoscope. So the pieces come together in different ways, in different configurations, representing these unique spatial and situational contexts that we've demonstrated and that evidence suggests have real implications for behavior at these places. Now, many of us in this room, especially those of you from the local police department, we all know that crimes cluster. They cluster spatially, maybe not in time, maybe there's temporal patterns, but just because they cluster spatially, we can't assume that we can respond to these problems with standard responses or standard strategies at these locations and assume that we'll have equal success in different jurisdictions or for different types of crimes. We know that behavior settings differ, and therefore the interventions need to be tailored accordingly, and they need to be tailored to the specific jurisdiction. So traditional analyses and responses to crime, like hotspots mapping or hotspots policing, assumes that crime doesn't move, that it's always going to occur in the future where it did in the past, even when police intervene. A heavy reliance on these crime incidents or these past occurrences of crime as the predictor, I don't mean to go into statistics here, but you have the independent variable and the dependent variable, what you use to predict and what you expect as the outcome. So if you expect crime incidents to predict new crime incidents, that is not a sustainable process. That is not a sustainable analytical method. If the goal of public safety is to have a measured impact on preventing crime altogether, what if you are 100% successful? Can you answer that question with the methods that you're using? Now, I know that it's very unlikely that any jurisdiction is going to be 100% successful at preventing crime. And unfortunately, what tends to happen is that crime hotspots remain quite stable over time. They're resilient over time. And this is often despite the many foot patrols or arrests or citations or other traditional policing tactics that are utilized at these locations. So while hotspots tell you where crime is happening, they do not tell you why it's happening. Hotspots tell you where the problem is, but it doesn't consider the spatial factors that make these areas opportunistic in the first place. These are essentially signs and symptoms of environments that are highly suitable for crime, but they offer very, very little insights for targeting solutions intended to manage these problems or to govern the crime risks. What risk-train modeling provides is a spatial diagnosis, so we can learn where to go, what to do when we get there, and why we're doing what we're doing when we get there. So, if we want to stop playing whack-a-mole, and we've heard this described to us by many practitioners in many different jurisdictions, then what we really need to do with all of this in mind is to realize that targeting crime problems requires a concerted effort to think about or to focus on the mechanisms that enable hotspots to emerge, to persist, or to desist. And as an example of this, one study that I'd like to demonstrate here is our current work in Atlantic City. We began working in Atlantic City because the chief approached us, actually the lieutenant and then the chief and a number of others who were introduced and came on board over time, but they approached us because they wanted to do something different in Atlantic City. This was about 2 years ago now, about the summer of 2015. And they said, we don't want to do CompStat, and we don't want to do stop and frisk, and yet we want to do intelligence-led policing. And as it happens, we're getting a whole new CAD system, an all-new RMS system. We don't have a crime analyst, but we know we want to use our data. So we asked them what they wanted to focus on, and they said that they wanted to focus on robberies and shootings. That was the start of the project in Atlantic City. As an example, the most recent risk train model in Atlantic City was used to assess or to diagnose the underlying features that were commonly present at the places where robbery incidents occurred. We used these robbery incidents, which appear here on the screen, over the past 2 months, and a risk train model was run to identify the attractors in the physical landscape that create contexts for robberies. Basically, if you think about what risk train modeling is doing, It's diagnosing features that are commonly present at these locations, but more importantly, it's identifying the preferences of the offenders over and over and over again. Even these offenders that are not operating in sync or in any coordinated way. What's common about their preferences to choose these locations over and over again that create these hotspots? These are the 2 months of robbery incidents shown on the screen. The risk train model found in the most recent analysis 3 risk factors to be significant. The first was hotels and rooming houses, which topped the list. These places, within a half a block from hotels and rooming houses, had over 18 times greater risk of robbery than anywhere else in the city. The other significant risk factor was found to be convenience stores. Here, the risk train model identified convenience stores as the second most influential risk factor, where places within a half a block from convenience stores were 8 times more likely to experience robberies than anywhere else in the city. And takeout restaurants, fast food restaurants, created a spatial influence to nearby places that was 7.5 times greater than anywhere else in the city. Where all of these influences overlap, these features that influence behavior nearby them overlap and interact, they create a range of relative risks throughout the city that make robbery more attractive in these settings than others. So shown here are the highest risk places for robbery because these are the places that have risk scores greater than 2 standard deviations from the mean. You can ask me what that means at the end. But essentially, risk is everywhere. Risk is rarely 0. Risk is highest when it's exceptional. And this is exceptional. These places on the screen. Yeah?
So I'm wondering, how far back did you gather information to create the trend to get to that risk score?
So we began with a pilot project that I'm going to explain in just a moment, but we began with a pilot project beginning in 2016. It began in January of 2016 and went throughout the year. We used a year's worth of data to assess the likely locations of the robberies and shootings. This pilot project was intended to develop buy-in and just to demonstrate that there could be some predictability here. I'll explain a little bit more in just a minute. But then we realized through that project that we really needed a model that was more dynamic and more flexible because police were having an impact on crime and are likely to have an impact on crime. We should assume that. So the 2-month moving window allowed for that dynamic assessment and to pick up the changes in response to the police actions that were directed to these locations. So what this somewhat quickly demonstrates is that the risk train model identifies these risk factors. You look at these risk factors and overlay them on the maps, and they make intuitive sense. At least at face value, they make sense. And now, when we layer these risk factors on top of one another and identify these high-risk locations, we are diagnosing the environmental attractors of illegal behavior. And we found that through our research over the past 8 years, that risk train modeling can make very accurate forecasts of new crime locations, even if crime hasn't happened there before. And these forecasted areas become the target areas for what we call risk-based policing. So risk-based policing achieves crime reductions because risk train modeling informs decisions by a variety of different stakeholders about what to focus on when police deploy to the high-risk locations. The deployment is not the end product. The strategic planning, the information, the thoughtful process about what is attracting these offenses over and over again is the detailed conversation. The deployment is the start of the implementation strategies directed at changing those contexts. So when we have these meetings, what risk train modeling does is it's used to conduct a risk assessment. It identifies why certain places are attractive settings for criminals over and over again through what we call risk narratives. These narratives or discussions of event context or stories, if you will, are essentially hypotheses. It's what people, how we interpret these results. And it allows police and their other partners to address the crime contexts at these target areas. And this allows them to make high-risk places less desirable to commit crime. This works without focusing on people. The focus is only on the place. and it is done without any increases in arrests. I can discuss an example in Colorado Springs through one of our projects funded by NIJ, where they chose to focus on motor vehicle theft. We can go into detail about their specific intervention strategy, but just as an example, their law enforcement actions focused on a number of different factors, one of which included disorder offenses. Now, the moment you think of disorder, if you think stop and frisk, you might think New York, you might think of other community relations matters. In this case, all of these incidents were simply when a 911 call came into dispatch that was tagged a disorder offense, and it was located in a high-risk location. They prioritized it and allocated resources to that location. Their intervention strategy resulted in 33% reduction in motor vehicle thefts over 3 months. There were 139 instances of police dealings with people in these locations. Only 10 of them resulted in a summons. Most of them were verbal warnings. 0 arrests occurred. So they're one example, among others, about how you can really take the focus off of people, put it on places, achieve results, and improve relationships with the communities that you're working with. So Atlantic City provides a really great example for a number of reasons. As a social scientist, it's rare that we get to do an experiment on an island. And Atlantic City is on an island, so there's not too many places you can displace to. But what Atlantic City provides is a good example for this conversation about how you can create risk narratives and then how you can develop intervention strategies around them. So in 2016, we ran a year-long pilot project. We used risk trade modeling to predict the high-risk locations for robberies and for shootings. We identified the environmental features that tended to influence these locations the most, and those features were convenience stores, laundromats, and vacant buildings. We presented these results to the police as well as other stakeholders. I'll explain a little in just a moment, but we had community action meetings, we had police action meetings. Action is an acronym that I'll get to in just a minute. And we presented these results and asked, A, does this make sense? Did we use the right data? Could the data we use be potentially biased systematically? And if these results make sense, why do you think they make sense? And how do they relate to crime? And so first of all, I should note that risk trade modeling produced what we would consider actionable information. In this case, we're actually acting on it in these meetings, but information that facilitated this conversation, which wouldn't have happened otherwise if the only focus was on here's the problem, let's go do something about it. This facilitated a different conversation. And the consensus from the conversation was that convenience stores were places that was easy to loiter. They were places that were usually open late. They were places where people come and go freely. These were probably places, because the police understand shootings and robberies to be connected to the drug trade, these were places where drug buyers were solicited. Nearby laundromats, which in Atlantic City are usually coin-operated and open late at night, are places where they're told to then go to make the transaction. And the nearby vacant properties are used as stash houses for the dealers, for the drugs and weapons, or they're used by the buyers to go use the drugs after they purchase. And as this began making sense to people, we developed an intervention strategy that would focus on these locations. The target areas that are here in red were the target areas that were selected among the highest risk places for both robberies and shootings in Atlantic City. We developed a simulated intervention strategy. They didn't actually implement the intervention strategy because the pilot project was intended to have a tabletop exercise to identify target areas. Is it possible? Come up with an intervention strategy. Would it be possible? And how predictive would this have been? So the year went by and we kind of tested that. But these were the target areas that they selected. They were just the equivalent of 10 blocks, totaling less than a square mile. And at the end of 2016, we assessed what happened. We found that in these 10 blocks, which off the top of my head, I think it's actually 0.2 of a square mile in area, It accounted for 26% of all the shootings in 2016 and 53% of all the robberies. In fact, 67% of all the robberies occur in the top 5% of the high-risk places, and 57% of all the shootings occur in the top 5%, just to put it in perspective. So we'll get to the intervention strategy, but one thing that's important to note is that this risk train model that was produced in January 2016 identified convenience stores as a significant risk factor and a major attractor of robberies nearly a full year before an eventual spree of convenience store robberies. I couldn't have made this up any better. There was this emergence in early fall of convenience stores being robbed. It made the news, it created a lot of fear, and because this pilot project was simply to kind of watch and observe, it wasn't an implementation, police used traditional practices to try to suppress it. And that didn't work. It continued through the fall, through December, into the next year. It's worth noting that this certainly helped to spur buy-in among various stakeholders, and especially the previously skeptical police officers who thought we were just those academics coming in telling them how to do their job, which we weren't. We don't know how to do their job. But now, in 2017, they fully implemented risk-based policing. It began in January, the intervention strategy began in February, and in the first quarter of the year, we're already witnessing month-to-month crime reductions. We have 22% fewer robberies compared to the first quarter of last year. And this reduction coincides with the police department's risk reduction activities, which were specifically focused on the places identified by the risk train model. They did not focus on people, they did not have an increase in arrests, and the intention was to mitigate the robbery risks. So the intervention strategy, I don't think I'm preempting anything here. The intervention strategy was quite simple. We identified the high-risk locations. Each month, we tell them the new places to focus on. The intervention strategy is to focus on the risk factors that were identified in those locations. So as an example, the convenience stores, the strategy that they came up with, and this was theirs, not ours, was to do something that that was manageable. So they decided to have signage sheets, put signage sheets in the convenience stores, and in the high-risk locations, within the convenience stores, every shift, instruct patrol officers to stop in, shake hands with the manager, say hello. Both the manager and the officer sign the sheet. Sheets get collected. We record what they've done and where they did it. The planning department, the Department of Planning in Atlantic City, said we're already boarding up vacant properties. Why don't we just focus on the vacant properties near the convenience stores and the laundromats? And the example kind of continued with a variety of stakeholders coming up with strategies to simply reallocate existing resources without really any additional costs or effort. So the way this played out and the way that intervention strategy came about was through action meetings. Any questions before I get to them? Yeah.
I was curious if you held out any of your high-risk cases for the intervention to see if those cases still had higher rates of crime.
Yeah.
Or did you focus entirely on your high risk and just not treat your lower risk?
We did not hold any out. This was not intended to be an experiment.
Okay.
So the way that this is actually set up with Rutgers is as a training exercise. So they brought us in to begin the process, teach them how to do it, show them how to do risk train modeling. As they slowly take over more responsibility to do the analysis and manage the meetings, as we take less, we leave, they can continue to do it, and they don't need us anymore. So we simply tried to mimic what police would want to do, and this was not funded nor intended to be an experiment. That said, we are recording what they do and where they do it, so should we be interested in assessing it, we can use something like propensity score matching or something to see whether or not there were places that got interventions, places that didn't, that had similar qualities, and do some sort of analysis, but it wasn't the intention, it wasn't designed that way. Yeah.
So just to clarify, you said a couple times that you were able to reduce crime, that crime went down in these areas. How did you determine that crime went down? Are you saying that it was as a result of what you did?
We're not saying that crime went down in, I don't mean to mischaracterize it. Crime did not go down in the areas where the interventions occurred. That was not assessed. Crime went down citywide because the intervention was implemented citywide. That was the only level of assessment we've done so far in Atlantic City. That's not the case in the other studies. Colorado Springs with motor vehicle thefts, Glendale, Arizona with the robberies, Kansas City, Missouri with shootings, Newark, New Jersey with gun violence. Those are all experimental designs as research projects designed and funded through federal research grants. This is simply something Atlantic City wanted to do, and we're helping them do it the way they want to do it. We're trying to measure it as best as possible because I'd love to be able to answer these kinds of questions with that statistical significance and p-values later on, but that's not what they want, and that's not what I have at this point. Good questions, though. So the action meetings were intended to communicate what we're doing, or I should say what the police are doing, why they're doing it, and whether the strategy that they've come up with could be altered or improved with stakeholder feedback. There were police action meetings and community action meetings, and these meetings essentially guided the iterative nature of risk-based policing with RTM. The action meetings focused on assessments, connections, tasks, interventions, outcomes, and notifications. In a nutshell, assessment is the risk assessment. The connections is part of the conversation to identify possible features that could connect to the crimes because of observation, experience, research literature, patrol functions, stakeholder feedback, and so forth. That data is collected and becomes part of the assessment. Tasks is simply to remind people that they have responsibilities, and everybody needs to have a responsibility to collect the data, to maintain the data. If nobody has tasks, or if no one person has a specific task or responsibility, we found nobody tends to, and that was difficult to manage data. Interventions, we develop an intervention and then deploy it. We collect information as best as possible about what was done and where it was done, and then we notify everybody in the next iteration of this whole process. So there's transparency in what's being done. There's clear communication among both the police and the public, as well as bi-directional feedback. These action meetings include multiple stakeholders. They recur monthly. And the goal is to stay on top of the dynamic and most pressing public safety problems. If police are going to deploy to problem areas and we think our intervention strategy is going to work, we should assume it will. And we should assume when it does, crime patterns will change and that we can constantly stay ahead of this. So, yeah.
So I'm just curious, during your action meetings, as you got community feedback, were topics brought up like economic opportunities, mental health services as contributing factors to the violence, or was this strictly based on the structure of the environments that you were looking at? Did some of these human service type of things come up as well?
Yeah, it's a good question, because what's interesting is risk trade modeling is intended to focus on places. It's a spatial analysis where there is not supposed to be a disconnect between the response at the places which unduly focuses on people located there. What's interesting is when we have these conversations and began these community action meetings, a lot of the members of the community would bring up issues like education, mental health, social services, jobs, job training, a number of things that really affect people. And all of these matter, I mean, these all matter, but the one thing that we need to remind ourselves is, for the same reason we don't advocate using census data in risk trade modeling, we are not focused on, or police are not focused on their deployments for these types of matters on a day-to-day basis. So what it really requires is a concerted effort to bring in multiple stakeholders to try to address a variety of different problems that are creating and sustaining these contexts. In response to some of these things, one project in Jersey City, they hired a full-time social worker, and the police referred at-risk and opportunity, what they call opportunity youth at some of these high-risk locations to the social worker, and solicited feedback or solicited participation from the local faith-based and other organizations so that they can have direct connection between service delivery and referral. Atlantic City is in a great location to do the same thing, and they've already reached out to an organization that focuses on job training, teaching people how to be baristas and other types of, fulfill other types of jobs that are useful in the hospitality industry, which is in Atlantic City. So it's interesting how we are so focused on places, but a lot of people don't want to stop thinking about people, and we found a way to incorporate that into these intervention strategies. Yeah.
You just said that you don't advocate the use of census data in RTMs. Could you go into why not?
Sure. So there's a number of reasons. One, census data is always outdated. Two, the smallest unit of analysis is the block group, rarely the block for the type of data that we want. Those two things in and of themselves are not conducive to risk-trained modeling because we're assessing the data at the micro level. Our risk assessments and our forecasts are, in this case, at the half a block. When we say that a high-risk location is located here, we're saying in Atlantic City, an area that is 154 feet by 154 feet, the equivalent of half a block. So it's not micro-level data, therefore we don't use it. That said, census data from a policing perspective is not what they solve on a daily basis. So if we were to identify census variables or demographic data and identify places as a function of the people located there, which is essentially what the census data is, we would be asking them to go to places and think about the people, and that's not what we intend to do.
Okay. I guess as a follow-up to that, so you're saying that it's outdated because the census block level data is only collected every 10 years. And you can't you can't use ACS data, which is updated more regularly because it's at the block group level.
Yes, that's true. Also, I mean, Atlantic City is a great example of another reason why this wouldn't work. Atlantic City has 35,000 residents of population on an annual basis. They have 150,000 people visit on a daily basis, and they have 25 million people visit yearly. So using census data doesn't get at the influx and the transient nature of the population. And regardless of that, people choose the same places to commit crime, even though it's not the people that live there. I think you were first.
Right. I have a question regarding whether or not this analytical tool, have you considered that it may be used eventually to add to the problem that it's trying to solve? Specifically, certain communities have trademarks which would be picked up in your evidence-based decision making. For instance, in Ward 7 here, there's only one grocery store in the entire ward, which means that many people are going to the corner stores that you referenced. And if police or policymakers identified corner stores, they would actually be identifying poor neighborhoods. And if they began to deploy and to implement certain tactics, such as stop and frisk, or legitimize stop and frisk, or in New York, where I'm from, Rudy Giuliani, it became sort of illegal to be on your stoop because that was loitering. And there's a good amount of history and legal and ethical questions, and maybe this is for the end, but right off the bat, it strikes to me as a concern.
You're right. So there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I don't know if people can hear me in the back. It's a great question, and it's important. First, the intent. Risk-based policing is not just a change in operations, it's a change in mindset. And the goal is to do a place-based analysis and to come up with strategies focused on places without the assumption people located there are the problem. That said, changing mindset is complicated and difficult, but it can happen, especially with the right tools, such as RTM. But more to your question, in a lot of the cities we've done the analyses, they tend to be quite homogeneous, both in census and demographic data, like Newark, New Jersey, for example, as well as be food deserts, and have features of the landscape that are quite common throughout the environment. So an opposite reaction is we identify convenience stores as a problem, and the response initially is, well, what do you want us to do, shut down all the convenience stores? And the answer is no. The answer is to try to figure out what's going on with the convenience stores that create the risk. And to figure out a way to mitigate or make it less attractive. An example would be in Glendale, Arizona, convenience stores were found to be, if you were within a block and a half from a convenience store in Glendale, you were at more than 2 times more likely to be robbed or to be in a place that was likely to experience robbery. And when we started asking why, they explained, we just got these kiosks that allow you to dispose of used tablet and cell phone devices. And a lot of these convenience stores have these kiosks, and they allow for instant cash for these devices. So with fewer payphones nowadays, and with the increased access to instant cash from these kiosks, it creates a situation where if you're going to rob somebody, do it near the convenience store because that's where you can get the cash. So the intervention strategy was not prevent people or disrupt people's activity, but to actually go into the convenience stores, ask the place managers to move the kiosk closer to the front window as opposed to the back of the store, take down some of the signage from the front window, and create more of a deterrent effect for people who might be stealing and taking the time at this device to get the cash. It's one example, and it might not be directly connected to the question, but what it gets at is the many places we conduct risk terrain modeling in have areas that are defined by features of the landscape like check cashing places, which may not be in some areas but are common in others, or convenience stores because they don't have grocery stores. And the argument is, just because these features are located there doesn't mean the people located there should be susceptible to the type of behavior that these facilities permit when they're located to other facilities that make this type of activity conducive to the outcomes that we want to prevent. So through the intervention strategy development and deployment of resources, the goal is to make these environments more hospitable for the people that are living there in a way that doesn't interfere with the business and doesn't interfere with the people that are utilizing those businesses. Is that?
Well, it sounds to me, frankly, that it will be used. It just depends on the jurisdiction. And so that this will likely be a tool used to promote some things that many are trying to avoid at this stage, seeing that robbery and murder are being more linked to mental health and poverty and economic opportunity and education. So that's what I got from your response. But thank you.
We can come back to it, and perhaps some of the rest of the conversation would spur some further conversation.
Right.
Did you want to add?
That's right. You gotta hold it down. Can you hear that? Oh, you gotta hold it down. So part of the answer to that actually has to do in terms of changing the mindset of the police. One of the things we've encountered in Atlantic City is the police are absolutely convinced that the crime problems relate to public housing. Absolutely convinced. And we said, oh, that's interesting, but it doesn't show up in our analysis. So, well, but it's got to be there, but it doesn't show up in the analysis. So you're going to go to the public housing and do whatever you think you need to do there, but it's not, somehow or another you're going to have to justify it because it's not something that we would predict under this model. So they said, so what is doing that? What is causing the problem? So we have this discussion with them around what other issues may be appearing. In the subsequent analysis, after the first, they're starting to see the rooming houses show up. And they said, well, why would rooming houses show up? I said, well, because there's lots of problems with people coming in from outside, from New York, who are setting up shop in these rooming houses, and they're doing prostitution, they're selling drugs, and so on and so forth. So we said, so it's not the people who live in Atlantic City who are your problem, it's the people who are coming in from the outside? They said, yeah. So well, why are you thinking that it's all happening in the public housing? Right? So in a sense, what you're trying to do is you're trying to disrupt this concept that things operate the particular way they do because that's the way we've always thought about it. So our policing strategies are always going to be consistent with what we've done before, even though we know they don't work very well. And even though that we know that the community itself is unhappy with a lot of that policing. And even though we know when we start doing the analysis then it's not really where the problems are occurring. So I think that it's, in a sense, is a disruptive technology. It's trying to get at new ways of looking at these problems and thinking, not having to go back to this idea of using strategies that don't work or that really are harm our community.
Atlantic City is a great example because they were so convinced that the public housing was the problem, they would constantly deploy to those places. And when we showed them that there was no correlation whatsoever between these places and crime, and they began focusing on the places where we suggested, not only did crime go down, but they began to admit that, maybe you're right, we should stop focusing on these places and those people located there. It's hard to hear you.
I apologize. I totally agree with the precursors that promote crime and those convenience stores and situations like that. But more than Ward 7 to speak clearly, there's a convenience store in every corner. There's a convenience store nearly close to a convenience store, and then within that adjacent area there'll be a liquor store. So if you have these locations that are not moving, that are increasing, what can you do if these are essentially assisting in getting criminal activity?
Good question. So for starters, just because we said convenience stores are significant in Atlantic City doesn't mean they are here. The analysis would have to be done here to have further that conversation. It's possible that it's not all convenience stores that are risky. It's just the ones near the liquor stores. That would come up in the analysis. But more importantly, while these features of the landscape are static, right, they don't move, crime is actually quite dynamic, and the influence that these features have are more dynamic than we might think. For example, the risk of having a fight at a bar at 10 p.m. on Friday is going to be much higher than 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, right? The risk that is presented by schools is going to be very different during school hours versus after school hours. The influence that static features of the landscape have on human behavior is very dynamic across time. And the risk train modeling process allows you to assess different risk factors at different times of the day. For example, in one city they had 3 shifts. They asked about doing a risk train model for each shift, and then developed different intervention strategies by shift. Yeah.
So when you talked about the action meeting, you mentioned stakeholders a few times, and you talked about community members and folks who can be voices. Who specifically is at the table from the agencies? Is it street-level police officers, or is it the supervisors who decide on the strategies? Who is at the table?
At the police meeting or the community?
The police meeting.
Police meeting. So in Atlantic City, the police meeting included the chief, the deputy chief, commanders, district commanders, which were lieutenants, and in some cases, lower-level officers like detectives or sergeants who have certain responsibilities, like the community policing officer, the school resource officer, who's another one, the public relations person, as well as some detectives here and there. Mainly, they're the ones that were invited by the chief, and that's all we could have. Ideally, we think there should be patrol officers. There should be sergeants. The ones that are patrolling the areas and doing what's being asked should also provide feedback at the next iteration. So somebody should represent them, such as the sergeant, or there should be some sort of round robin where different ones get to participate in the conversation. That's at the police meeting. So what risk train modeling with action allows is for better utilization of resources. It allows for problem-solving efforts to be grounded as well as evidence-based. Evidence-based in terms of the intervention strategies that are developed through these conversations should be based on best practices. And the police and others know this better than we do. We don't dictate these things. It's a conversation starter. But also it allows for better utilization of these resources with increased transparency for the actions of the police and everybody else, because you have a way to explain where you're going, why you're doing what you're doing, and what the impact might be the next iteration. And if it's not working the way you expect because you have a new model that creates an expectation of what should be, then you can adjust and redo and continue forward. It's sustainable both financially and politically, especially in Atlantic City. It's been If you've been following the news, Atlantic City's having some trouble. But this is something that's endorsed by the mayor, it's endorsed by the prosecutor's office, it's endorsed, who else? The mayor, prosecutor's office, different city divisions within municipal government, city council attends the community stakeholder meetings. There's a wide variety of support, including at the community stakeholder meetings. We have neighborhood associations representatives. We have, at one of the previous meetings, we had the representatives from the NAACP. Anyone who is invited, who is able to participate can, but these are not town hall meetings. I should kind of clarify that. These aren't complaint sessions. People that have something to provide and add to the conversation are invited, and then they're asked, who else do you think should be invited, and there's a snowball from there. We've also had legal scholars review and write about risk terrain modeling. They have endorsed RTM in some of these publications and law reviews as one of the only methods of crime analysis that respects constitutional protections of the Fourth Amendment and increases objectivity and transparency in policing practices, because it's one of the few methods out there, if only as they've described, that articulates, quote, high-risk areas and allows for some transparency and justification in these types of deployments. So with risk-based policing, we've seen that crime goes down, and also that people get the credit they deserve for making this outcome happen. Risk terrain modeling identifies these risky places, and it also empowers police to think outside the box of traditional responses to crime, which are usually very person-oriented, and instead to focus on responding to crime that are place-based, which are consistent and complement the analyses that are used for that deployment. So, in summary, one takeaway from all of this, it should be apparent that it's important to consider the impact of the physical environment and how it influences outcomes that result in human interactions at places, whether those human interactions are legal or illegal or anything in between. Environment, location matters, quite frankly. And as one of the tools in this endeavor, risk terrain modeling can provide actionable insights for improving coordination among various agencies and practitioners. It can inform decisions about where to dedicate resources and to direct strategies. It can justify collaboration and collaborative problem solving among many stakeholders who might have otherwise not thought they had a share of the burden of doing something about crime or public safety. And it helps to write the crime risk narratives, which hopefully you got a little bit from this, that they are then actionable and justifiable. So, in a nutshell, risk terrain modeling enables you to focus on places and not just people. Through these development of risk narratives and through the constant process of this, risk-based policing is the product. Risk-based policing uses risk terrain modeling, uses action meetings, and has a mindset and an operational practice that does not intend to assume people located at places are the problem, but that places can influence behavior over and over and over again, and to do something about it. These are some of the principles that we've articulated for risk-based policing, but we found that when police share the burden of ensuring public safety with community stakeholders, these people become partners to solve existing crime problems. And they also help to identify and address emerging public safety threats. And this keeps police officers safer as well. We've gotten lots of feedback that police enjoy being able to talk to people and stop and have conversations with people for reasons that are, kind and conversational, such as going into the convenience stores and talking to the managers and then running into somebody using the store and being asked, why are you here, and explaining why and being thanked and so forth. So it keeps police safer as well. And it goes a long way towards making policing and other activities effective and sustainable. Police still investigate crime. They still make arrests. These things continue to be important. We're not taking that away from the cops who think their job is to investigate crime. But this provides new performance measures for police agencies. And it removes the need for sole dependency on traditional policing practices and tickets or arrests or stops as the measure of successful policing at hotspots. And it gives credit to the people who do these alternative activities and gives the credit that's deserved. Yeah.
I have two questions. You talked a lot about what the police action meetings look like, who's there, how it goes. Could you describe the community action meetings and who's involved in those, and if there are any community members who are representatives for the police action meetings? That's one question. And the second question I have is, do you have sites where you've worked where you have not seen a reduction in things like arrests and citations, where in fact you've either seen, like a perversion of what you're trying to do, where you haven't been able to change the mindset of police despite your best efforts?
Yeah. Risk train modeling is used, I'll start with the last one first. Risk train modeling is basically free, it's online, anybody can use it. It's used by a lot of different agencies, far more than we know are using it. So the answer is probably yes. It's probably being used to justify actions that they would have otherwise wanted to do anyway. Or to identify risky places as if they were hotspots and not think about how to address the underlying problems. Anybody can use your data or your product the wrong way. The agencies we've worked with directly through research projects, federally funded projects, or volunteer projects like in Atlantic City, we struggle with convincing them that they need to think differently, but we stick with it. And what we found is that while they can be resistive to that, the data generally speaks for itself over time, and they realize that being against success, the demonstration of success, isn't what they want to be in favor of either, so they go along with it. So I think the short answer to the question is yes, people can use it poorly. But the way we advocate it being used is through a thoughtful process of knowing what your intentions are. If you're using risk train modeling to do hotspots policing, you shouldn't be using risk train modeling. You need to know, you need to want to police differently, you need to want to use data differently, you need to want to use more than just crime data and use other types of data to understand things more comprehensively than you otherwise would. You need to want to have a goal of better public relations, or you need to want to have a goal of community-based policing. There's got to be intent behind the effort. So we tend to be involved directly in those types of scenarios, and that's probably the best way to answer that question. The first question, now I forgot what it was. The community action meetings. So there are police that participate in the community action meetings. And interestingly enough, some of these meetings, this was the first time the police and the community sat in the same room. So the police had a newfound respect for the feedback of the community. The community was not used to sitting in the same room with the police. So it was interesting. It's also interesting to note that some of the police representatives were the chaplains of the police department, which are the priests and faith-based leaders in the community who also serve as chaplains to the department. So they were also in some of these community action meetings. And they talked about, they were outspoken and talked about these results and had important things to say. Other people that are invited are, with regard to policing and security, representatives of the security from the casinos, representatives of security from different outdoor malls like Tanger of the Walks that's out there. We have members of the mercantile associations, members of the neighborhoods associations. We have convenience stores managers who choose to come and provide feedback on what's going on with their check-ins. So it's not an open call, so I don't want to mischaracterize it as that, but the chief invites people to start that he thinks could have value in the conversation, not to just complain. Complaints are welcome, but to have value, and then it snowballs from there.
A quick question. First off, thank you, of course, for the presentation. Walk through this. I'm struck as the councilman with a policymaker hat on. I'm looking at obviously a lot more than just public safety through a police lens. So what I'm curious about is, as you've looked at this and worked with other jurisdictions, is it the right? So much of your risk terrain modeling seems to be based on policy choices, investment choices, infrastructure choices. Is the discussion best to be led by a police chief, or is that type of discussion best led by either an executive or somebody who's looking at and brings to the table more than just the police? Because obviously the police have a significant role here, but a lot of the decision making that you're talking about, how to kind of move the needle, seems to be on a whole host of issues that aren't necessarily driven from a police perspective.
I think you're absolutely right. You want to?
Well, we'd love to talk to mayors and council members, and for us, the entry point is the police, because the police are a 24-hour service, and they're confronted with these issues all the time. But trying to convince them that it's more than just simply crime fighting, and that it's community building. I mean, that's really the breakthrough. But it's only going to work if the leadership in the community comes along with that. The mayor of Atlantic City has been to our meetings, but he's pretty distracted by bankruptcy hearings and stuff like that. So it's hard to get really focused on. But it's interesting. The question you're asking is actually something we've thought a lot about. There's as you know, there's this sort of whole movement around smart cities. So every agency collects data. Every agency collects it spatially. Every agency presents the data descriptively. It's all flat. In other words, it shows you your spending goes up or something goes down, or this is a chart, but it doesn't tell you what relates to what. So the idea here is that really this is creating a relational database across all these different agencies and different types of data. So in this case, we're drawing data from the planning department, from the ABC, from all these types of things. We're drawing out data from all those agencies, and we just happen to be focusing on crime. Nothing to stop you from focusing on planning issues or transportation issues or anything else, because effectively they all connect in some way. So the smart cities idea is really, I think, the progression. That's where you've got to go. But then you have a different audience. You've got to get councilmen and women and mayors and everybody else to buy into the fact that they need to be evidence-based in the decisions they're making.
Yes.
What input did you get from the violators?
I haven't asked. You mean the offenders?
Yeah, offenders.
I don't know. We haven't asked them.
They left town.
Might be interesting.
It would be. We have gotten feedback. We have gotten feedback from the stakeholders, the community members, the members of the neighborhood associations, the mercantile associations, and we have received feedback from them. So much so that when we had to skip a community action meeting because of things that happened in the city and the police chief not being available, they were constantly emailing the chief asking what happened, why didn't we have one, when's the next one? So they're very receptive to it. It would be a great question and quite frankly, a great dissertation topic if anybody's a student to ask, what other people think. Yes.
Somewhat going along with what the councilman said, here in D.C., the Office I direct, Safer, Stronger D.C., we focus on people a lot. We look at community stabilization, community building, economic opportunities. Those, and we have one other stat. Help me out. What am I missing? I'll get you going. So there are 4 things that we look at as our theory of change. I think that what you all are speaking of is a very important portion of that. But we would welcome the opportunity to have a discussion about how this becomes that 5th focus area, because I think combined that when you do look at the infrastructure, but then you do look at the reasons behind some of the underlying factors of violence that contribute to the results that we're seeing, I think that there's a combination, there's a marriage there that could exist that could be very helpful.
I think you're absolutely right. One of the community action meetings, a woman who attended actually brought her, I want to say her nephew, and she asked about education. She goes, I want the crime problem solved by improving education, and I kind of respectfully said, I think that would be great. That's not what we're focusing on here, but this affects education. Talk about readiness to learn. Talk about stressors in school. If you walk through high-risk locations on your way to school, your stress levels are increased to the point where your research shows that you're less capable to learn. So if you want to focus on education, another piece to that is to look at the micro-level influence on the schools and the schoolyards, because these influence people's readiness to learn, safety going to and from schools, and access, in some cases, to these schools, because in some cases they're afraid to walk through some of these areas. So being able to identify these high-risk locations should have additional and secondary impacts beyond simply reducing crime, but also, for example, have a direct impact potentially on reducing neighborhood stresses that can improve education. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like we're telling you this solves education problems, but these things are very much connected.
Absolutely.
I think in the back.
Yeah, have you thought about using some forensic data in order to be able to...
I missed the last part, I'm sorry.
Have you thought about using some forensic data in order to be able to extract? Because I think that will allow you to pinpoint more than just have a general description of some of those areas.
So by forensic data, are you talking about specific characteristics of these places?
Yeah.
Yes, that would be awesome. Unfortunately, most data is not that specific. You know, our ability to get access to addresses of convenience stores and parks and liquor stores, that's become increasingly accessible and readily available. What would be great would be, here's a list of bars. Now, can we break it down by bars that have bouncers regularly, bars that have ATM machines, bars that have CCTV, convenience stores that have CCTV inside or outside, laundromats that are managed by a human versus coin operated. This data would be excellent to have, and it would allow for an additional level of detail that, if you have the data, would, I would imagine, improve your ability to identify high-risk locations.
So I'm one of the analysts for FPD. That's what we do. So should our decision makers decide to, we will be implementing it. So my question is a little more practical. Where do you get these layers of convenience stores?
Sure. So where do you begin?
Yeah.
You know, you begin by learning how to do risk train modeling. We have a webinar. We could do something like we're doing in Atlantic City, where we kind of teach you how to fish, so to speak, and then leave, because we don't want to be constantly, we don't want to be the ones dependent on it. So there needs to be some sustainability. So these researcher practitioner partnerships, we have webinars, you can get the software, but at the end of the day, the software automates the process of risk train modeling. Risk train modeling is free. You can go online, learn how to do it. The software helps to automate the process. We're in the process now of improving and updating our old version of the software, and it's the difference between analog and digital. We got permission, is this going to work? We got permission from from Rutgers to kind of share this with you, so please, just try to forget it when you leave. This really is still,
your mind goes blank when you walk.
This still is a beta version. This is not the final version, but I want to kind of give you a sense of what it is. So the software, and by the way, we're not selling software. You want to buy it, that'd be great. But you can do risk train modeling without the software. This product will be available as an online version, as a desktop version, as a server-based version, so you can install it on your systems, or as an API version, so you can integrate it into CAD systems or elsewhere. It's around $2,000, to cover the costs of the Amazon Web Server and all the other things that we need to maintain it. But we're not in the software business, so just to get that out of the way right off the bat. This software basically works like this. You begin. I don't know how to look at this. You begin with your study area. So here's an example of Atlantic City. You identify your boundary for the city of Atlantic City with a shapefile, which are usually readily available. Do you want to produce an aggravating model or a protective model? Aggravating model means you want to identify the features of the landscape that attract illegal behavior. Protective model means you want to identify the things that tend to correlate with the absence of that. So things that you could, capitalize on and improve on in some other places. Click next. The unit of measurement, it works in meters or feet for projections and so forth. The place size, this is the unit of analysis. I said 154 feet because we want to assess the risk throughout the entire city of Atlantic City at the micro unit of 154 feet. There's basically 5,820 places of this size in Atlantic City. It's about 17 square miles. So Atlantic City is about 17 square miles. The standard value is the level of the multiplier value, so it's intended to be the equivalent of a block length. So the place size is supposed to be the equivalent of half a block. The standard value is a block. Click next. What do we want to study? The analysis issue. Here we studied shootings from 2015. We pull the data in. You can have a KML file, shape file, CSV file. You pull the data in. All you need is the address or XY coordinate. If you have additional information, then you'll see on the next screen, or you'll see below, you can filter. So you can filter by date. So if you're interested in just the shifts, or you want to look at just the crimes that occurred in the nighttime hours as opposed to daytime hours, you can do that. Then you click next. Input your risk factors. This is probably where your question came from. These risk factors are usually public record. Chicago, Philadelphia, Massachusetts, they have GIS data portals. You can download this stuff pretty easily. If you have relationships with city agencies and they digitize this, they could probably provide it to you. All you need is a shape file or a KML file or a CSV file that has the addresses so you can geocode them and you input them into here. Fast food restaurants, liquor stores, bars, schools, these usually exist. And that's really all the data you need. It assesses whether or not the risk factor is influencing behavior as a function of proximity or density. Quickly, what that means is if you walk into an area and see a bar, are you at an increased risk of, say, robbery because you're within a distance of any particular bar? Or is it only in places where bars concentrate, like the bar district or the nightclub scene and so forth? How far from that feature is risky, up to how many blocks, for example? And do you want to do your analysis at the whole or half block increment? Click next. It gives you a summary of what risk factors you've inputted and what your parameters are. You can have it email you when the analysis is done, and then you click run. Basically, after you click run, apparently I have to click run, but I don't know if the servers are going to let us do this. But what I wanted to show you, if this works, we could talk, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. In the report produces shape files of the risky locations. It produces PDF output that you can share. It identifies the risk factors that are significant out of the many that you tested, gets rid of the ones that aren't, tells you what the spatial influence was. So when I say being within half a block from a rooming house in Atlantic City increases your risk by 18 times, this told me that. And it produces all that information.
So it tested different distances as well?
Yep. It tests the influence or the distance or the concentration effect of those features, gets rid of the features that are not significantly correlated with the outcome, keeps the ones that are, and then tells you the optimal influence that it has to produce the weights so that when they get combined, think of those overhead transparencies, right? When all these layers get combined, these are the places that have the highest risk because of where they co-locate based upon their spatial weights.
Okay, and the output, is there a relative risk layer? Not absolute.
Yes, so each individual risk factor has its risk. So when I say 18 times greater risk of being within a half block from a rooming house, that's relative to the other factors in the model. When they get combined, it produces the map. The map has standardized risk scores. So it tells you the relative risks throughout the landscape. And essentially what they mean, the statistical output, is basically interpreted as it's a probability. If you're familiar with Bayesian probabilities, it's basically a probability given the it's pretty good. Given the patterns of crime that you've tested and the risk trade modeling diagnosis, these are the places that have the greatest probability of outcomes relative to all other places throughout the jurisdiction. So Here are the highest risk locations for shootings in 2015. Here are the places that are merely above average. Here are the places where all the relative risks vary throughout the jurisdiction. The clear places are those that are a value of 1, so it's the normal. There's no such thing as low risk, but it's the lowest of the relative risk. And then this version produces priority areas. And this does an assessment based upon a research paper that we've got currently in review after a revise and resubmit, where we've demonstrated that the best way to identify the priority locations from the high-risk locations is to have a combination of places that have experienced crime clusters most recently that are also in the highest risk locations. And then when you do something about those, if crime should displace, it's likely to displace to the high-risk locations nearby, even if crime hasn't occurred. So this identifies those priority areas among the highest risk locations, which is based solely on just the RTM. And you can download all of the results. You can download the raw statistical data for the statisticians in the room who like to look at that stuff. You can download KML files to view in Google Earth. This is the best way, one way to communicate this information, because that creates that wow factor. You can zoom into the street view and look around to see what's going on at the high-risk locations and so forth. And it produces the shapefile output as well as the maps. And then the PDF report will output all the results as well as the maps. And you can use them however you want. So once you get them, you can then do whatever else you want. Let's show that. It's not ready. It doesn't work yet.
I have another question. How does this compare with less parametric models like predpol or pre-pol? Predpol, yeah. It doesn't. Well, I mean, in terms of like calibration.
Yeah. There are a lot of things. I have a lot of opinions about those types of models. Mm-hmm. I have a policy of not commenting on proprietary methods. I don't consider myself to compete with them because, quite frankly, this is evidence-based, and I know for a fact it's better. That said, this is not dependent upon past crimes to occur. Many other methods are. And what you find is that as you do that and then deploy resources to those places, the actions of the police begin to inform that model. And you get into a cycle of being told to go to places based upon the actions or biases of what was done when you were deployed. And over a period of time, that enhances the bias rather than minimizes it. And I think that also probably covers some of the things that were asked previously. That's all I have to say about that.
All right, and one more question. You have a lot of inputs into your risk factors. Is there any worry for overfitting? Because kind of a statistical background of mine, I just learned more than 7 is kind of too much.
Yeah. Yep, that's a good question. So all of the risk factors that we include, first of all, I should say this is not throwing paint against the wall. The risk factors that are included because there was a conversation about what we think is happening in this environment. Remember the action model assessment connections? We asked people, what's going on? What does the literature suggest is happening? Get that data that represents that. Literature shows bars relate to robbery, so we get that data. But we also can add data based upon user feedback and information. So it's either theoretically grounded, empirically derived, or informed by the people on the ground who think they know what's happening. And then we can either validate their perceptions or discuss why their perceptions might be not showing up.
So team, we got room. We got time for about one more question. Going once.
I work with the chief medical examiner looking at decreasing deaths. How can I use this? Because I hear a lot of policing, although it's still the crime is there. It's a public health. I mean, on all whether it's about the homicides, whether it's say sleep. There's a lot of resources. I was very impressed with that concept. How can I use this?
I think it would be, I don't think I can give a good answer off the top of my head because I think it deserves a real answer.
Yeah.
I imagine that it might be valuable to you, but it depends upon the data that you have. And I think it depends upon the question that you'd be asking. If you think of homicides as shootings, and violence-related deaths. It's, you can probably imagine how that relates.
Right.
We've looked at, we're beginning to look at suicide
Right.
in Colorado.
Okay.
Other researchers, a medical doctor in Texas has begun using it for child abuse.
Okay.
And they've been using it to prevent child abuse by identifying areas where there is an increased likelihood of child abuse for a number of factors,
Right.
and then not allocating enforcement, but allocating resources to try to provide things that can reduce those risks, and so on and so forth.
I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
You have one more.
Oh, I think mine might be long, so I'll ask him after.